Garland, who is the abbot here, will come up and give a 15-minute presentation. He is also the host for our event, so if we could thank him and welcome him.
All right, well, good afternoon, everybody. It is such a pleasure to see each person here. Myself, my team, and everybody who's been involved in this process is frankly blown away, humbled, and so grateful and thankful. Not only for each attender, but also for the speakers who have come, who have shared their heart, their wisdom, their passion, and hopefully have been an encouragement and an inspiration to each one of us, as we will all, considering we're almost all of us away from this space, when we go back to our homes and our own spaces to bring pieces of this conference. I have 15 minutes, which everybody knows I can never keep, but I will do my absolute best. So I'm going to be moving at a pace. I'm going to be moving at a fairly brisk pace, and if you want further information or want to know what I'm talking about, you can just sort of connect with me later if you feel like it. Okay, I've got my right-hand man, Douglas. Okay, who knows what that is? The cover of the Book of Kells. Thank you, Jonathan, he knew. And you're in the Urban Abbey. And the Urban Abbey is actually an intentional Christian community that is inspired by and informed by Irish abbeys in the past. Multiple different kinds of abbeys, but particular abbeys that were found in Ireland. And the inspiration for those, as many of you know, is St. Patrick. We were trying to answer the question, and it's in your little notebook here, how the church can build communities through rediscovering ancient visions for modern life. There's many ways to phrase that. But here's the challenge before us. All of us are aware of the increasingly disconnected church communities that exist throughout primarily the Western world. Disconnected. Irrelevant. 90%, I would say, give or take a few percentage points, 90% of church resources are spent making a Sunday morning happen more successfully, with more flash, with more flair, with the neighbors and the rest of the community sitting back and wondering, what are these people doing and why would we ever enter into those doors? And they are never given a good reason. Churches are emptying out, people are vacating, and not only are churches becoming more and more shells and husks of their former self, they are also, the remaining residents are turning cannibalistic, feeding off of each other, with the hierarchy at the top feeding off of whoever's left in ever more and more desperate schemes and tricks to bring in tithes and offerings. And the meaning crisis has hit church communities extremely hard. The question is, how's that going? How's that going for the churches in your city, where you come from? How are they doing? The place where I just came from before I moved here 7 years ago was Surrey, BC, and I worked for a megachurch called Village Church. They were growing by 1,000 people a year. So in 5 years, there were 5,000 people. When I left, there were about 7,500 people. And they were emptying out, kind of like Walmart shuts down all the small mom and pop shops. They were emptying out all the church plants and small church communities all around them. And it wasn't until I was going to seminary and I was encountering some of the pastors, men and women who were a little upset at realizing that I worked for the church that was emptying out their facilities and their spaces. And as we've noticed, if you were paying attention to the Canadian media landscape, you gather a bunch of God's people, I would say, under one leader, and then all you have to do is take out that one leader and everything falls apart, right? So, How to respond. Ancient pathways carved out by God, given as a way of return that many churches need to become reacquainted with. I'm going to read for you Isaiah 58. And I liken this to the Western church and the situation I just spoke of. Shout it aloud. Do not hold back. Raise your voice like a trumpet. Declare to my people their rebellion, and to the house of Jacob their sins. For day after day they seek me out. They seem eager to know my ways, as if there were a nation that does what is right and has not forsaken the commands of its God. They ask me for just decisions and seem eager for God to come near them. Why have we fasted, they say, and you have not seen it? Why have we humbled ourselves and you have not noticed? Why are our churches emptying out and people abandoning in droves? Yet on the day of your fasting, you do as you please and you exploit all of your workers. Your fasting ends in quarreling and strife and in striking each other with wicked fists. You cannot fast as you do today and expect your voice to be heard on high. Is this the kind of fast I have chosen, only a day for a man to humble himself? Is it only for bowing one's head like a reed and for lying on sackcloth and ashes? Is that what you call a fast, a day acceptable to the Lord? Is not this the kind of fasting I have chosen, says God, to loose the chains of injustice, to untie the cords of the yoke, to set the oppressed free and break every yoke? Is it not to share your food with the hungry, to provide the poor wanderer with shelter, and when you see the naked, to clothe him, and not to turn away from your own flesh and blood? And what happens if the church would actually do this? Then your light will break forth like the dawn, and your healing will quickly appear. Then your righteousness will go before you, and the glory of the Lord will be your rear guard. Then you will call, and the Lord will answer. You will cry for help, and he will say, here am I. If you do away with the yoke of oppression with a pointing finger and malicious talk, and if you spend yourselves in behalf of the hungry and satisfy the needs of the oppressed, then your light will rise in the darkness, and your night will become like the noonday. The Lord will guide you always. He will satisfy your needs in a sun-scorched land and will strengthen your frame. You will be like a well-watered garden, like a spring whose waters never fail. Your people will rebuild the ancient ruins and raise up the age-old foundations. You will be called repairer of broken walls, restorer of streets with dwellings. If you keep your feet from breaking the Sabbath and from doing as you please on my holy day, if you call the Sabbath a delight and the Lord's holy day honorable, and if you honor it by not going your own way and not doing as you please or speaking idle words, then you will find your joy in the Lord, and I will cause you to ride on the heights of the land and to feast on the inheritance of your father Jacob. The mouth of the Lord has spoken. That has been one of the founding verses for Urban Abbey for the last 7 years. We revisit this fairly often. How to address the broken down walls, the shells and husks of former church buildings, emptying out of people. Communities that have lost their way, that have no answer to a meaning crisis that is hitting, and which is the topic for this conference. And why does an abbey need to exist? Well, we have believed for a long time that to give good news to people and to a community, one must first be good news in their lives. Recognizing the hurts and the wounds and the damage in a city and in a community, and rise to the challenge. When we first came to the city of Thunder Bay, when we asked for the gifting of this building, which was given to our organization, immediately we went before City Council and we asked them, what are the biggest needs that are in the city of Thunder Bay? We didn't sit together as a Christian community and debate and discuss what we thought was important for the city. We actually asked the people who were engaged and involved and who knew what was happening. They said housing, social isolation, and food security. Those are the 3 largest needs in Thunder Bay. I would add drug addiction to that as well, but when you understand housing first, model, which I'm mostly in agreement with, that kind of settles some of those other concerns. But from day one, we began answering those needs and questions. We began offering meals downstairs, which we do still. Emergency sheltering, transitional sheltering. Opening up this space and creating a children's playroom so that families who are too poor to pay for children's play spaces when they're getting, isolated in the winter, not all of you are from the frozen north, but when you are, you understand how valuable space for your children can be in the winter so that you don't go crazy. These are some of the things that we began offering and making our entire space open to the community for whoever needed it for all kinds of different reasons. Children's drama groups and community orchestras. And then when COVID came and hit this community, we opened our doors to the health unit and we began housing people, up to 35 homeless people a night in one of our other locations. And it was primarily myself and a few other volunteers. And often there was 2 of us to 35 homeless people every single night, which is a challenge if any of you interact with people who are struggling in these ways. And so what is Urban Abbey? Urban Abbey is a community. It's a fellowship of people. I was inspired by Vervaeke's words in his conversation with Pajot lately. A fellowship of people who place at the top of their hierarchy and organizing principle, thank you, Pajot, the words that are found not only in Isaiah, but the words of Jesus himself. And I'm going to read these because this is the other motivating passage. And I'm a little bit pastor-like, like Vanderklay, because I can't help but read scripture when given the chance. And this is for primarily church people. This is not for people who exist outside the church. This is Matthew 25. When the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the angels with him, he will sit on his throne in heavenly glory. All the nations will be gathered before him. He will separate the people one from another as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. He will put the sheep on his right, goats on his left. Then the king will say to those on his right, "Come, you who are blessed by my Father, take your inheritance, the kingdom prepared for you since the creation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty. You gave me something to drink. I was a stranger. You invited me in. I needed clothes, and you clothed me. I was sick. You looked after me. I was in prison, and you came to visit me." Then the righteous will answer him, "Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink? When did we see you a stranger and invite you in, or needing clothes and clothe you? When did we see you sick or in prison and go to visit you?" The king will reply, "I tell you the truth. Whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers of mine, you did for me." Then he will say to those on his left, "Depart from me, you who are cursed, into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry, and you gave me nothing to eat. I was thirsty, you gave me nothing to drink. I was a stranger, and you did not invite me in. I needed clothes, and you did not clothe me. I was sick and in prison. You did not look after me." They also will answer, "Lord, when did we see you hungry or thirsty, or a stranger needing clothes, or sick or in prison, and did not help you?" And he will reply, "I tell you the truth, whatever you did not do for one of the least of these, you did not do for me." Then they will go away to eternal punishment, but the righteous to eternal life. In my opinion, Jesus cannot be more clear about what his expectations are for his people. People who say that they follow him in his ancient pathways. And so for the Urban Abbey, the path to restoration has been very clear. We have a guiding set of stars that is Isaiah 58 and Matthew chapter 25. And we peel back the mystery that Jesus laid out so many years ago, and we are actually attempting to rebuild walls and create a bit of a prototype for other church communities and other church spaces to replicate and potentially follow in their own way, answering the needs of their individual communities. And as Christian people, actually responding and listening to what the call of Jesus was for us. Because there seems to be some fairly simple questions asked. And for a very long time, I feel that the churches have lost this calling. And that was one of the primary reasons for why they existed and exist today. So, each day, Urban Abbey opens space for the community, meals for the poor, shelter for the cold and homeless. We have Dementia Cafe on Sundays for those who are experiencing dementia. We have a Habit Coffee Shop, which is a business ancillary to our charity so that we can do all of these things without putting our hand out and asking people who are coming here for help and peace for their money. We earn it, and we work hard for it. And we pray that this is a place where the peace of Christ can be found. And so our community is engaged in being the good news for a hurting city, restoring meaning to what was becoming a husk. We dream of being generative, not cannibalistic. And we find our lost and forgotten pathways with inspirations from Irish abbeys in the past, prophetic messages to God's people in Isaiah, and the words of Jesus himself in Matthew. I want you to, I'm going to have the shorter rule of life for the Abbey. I'm going to say a statement. This is what we do often in our prayer tower. It helps bind us together as a community. If you know anything about monastic rules or people who come together, they have a rule of life that sort of orders them. And I don't have time to get into that. But if you're willing to do the prayer part, I will do the statement reading part, and then I'm going to ask whoever's comfortable to do the prayer part with me. This is partly a selfish exercise because I want to hear so many people praying the Abbey rule of life together. So I'm going to take this mic. Okay. Sadly, I don't know it off by heart. I'm not that good of an abbot yet. The first, above all, we are taught by our Master, Jesus Christ, to love God with all our heart, all our soul, all our strength, all our mind, and to love our neighbor as ourselves, and then our works. And the prayer is, "Hear, O soul, the Lord your God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. Master, teach me." Humility. We choose to draw near to God through self-domination and blessed self-forgetfulness. God opposes the proud and gives grace to the humble. In blessed self-forgetfulness and full surrender, I clothe myself in humility. Lord, have mercy. Prayer. Our breath from God brings words to God in an unceasing flow. This restless spirit transformed into a sanctuary of prayer. I bring my words to you and long to hear your voice. Discernment. We follow Christ through darkness without error. In his light we see light. In a land of deep darkness I look to you, illumine the way. Silence. We quiet the noise that deafens by cultivating righteousness through a silence that leads to peace. In the noise that drowns out your voice, I will be still and quiet my soul. The Lord is near those who wait on him. Work and rest. Our work shall flow out of our rest, and we shall find our rest in God. I scatter myself to meet many expectations. Anxiety rises within. My labor this day will proceed from uninhibited rest in God. My hope is in you. Table fellowship and hospitality. We attend to the gift of God in each other, inviting to our table stranger and brother. I deny my insular and independent self and open my life to the other. Christ, you are my life. Simplicity and overcoming greed. We, with single focus on God, will find the joy of simply living. In a world with heaven forgot, I will delight in you. You are the strength of my heart and my portion forever. Fidelity. We covenant with God and others to possess our bodies in honor. This fickle heart hold fast. My covenant I keep this day. Your unfailing love surrounds me. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Okay, so that's why Urban Abbey. And I'm just going to do 2 shameless plugs real fast before I walk off the stage. It's Douglas's cue. Thank you, Douglas. Okay, the 400. This is beginning soon in partnership with Eamon Wilson. King David was running from Saul. Life was at risk. He prayed and he asked God for help. God sent him 400 men who became his mighty men. But who were they to start with? In addition, every man who came to King David was desperate, in debt, and disconnected. Think of the hero's journey, young man, warrior, sage. Think of fellowship, friendship again. Many things that Vervaeke's touching on lately, thinking about. Friendship, fraternity. Ultimate goal, how do you call men together to do things and work together? We're dealing with, some of you think different things, but I am looking at the World Economic Forum talking about everybody owning nothing and being happy. Barrier to men being able to achieve sometimes relationships and family is home ownership. They are locked out of life in many different kinds of ways. And so my concept and my model is create men's groups where the focus is home ownership. If you're a sage, you can invest in. If you're a warrior who already owns your own stuff, you can input value, you can extract it. And if you're a young man, you join up because you're in rental hell and you want to get your life on track. You can also be 40, 50, 60. These are life stages. It's not numerical ages, okay? Okay, that's coming up. So we'll be doing stuff. So just keep an eye out. And that's King David looking kind of cool. Okay, anyway, second, Abbey in the Woods. We're working on this right now. It's Abbey in the Woods / Eco Village. I want to have a little Abbey in the Woods because that's what original Abbeys were like. They weren't downtown in city centers to start with. And we're working with a group of intentional founding families who want to do farming, sustainable living, off the grid, all that kind of stuff. But we also want to include, it's going to be on lakefront, it's going to be aging in place, it's going to be a Renaissance-styled stone village with shops on the main floor, people and residences up on the second. It's going to be a spa, yurt Airbnb, a bunch of stuff, about 100 people living on the property. And we're looking at Nebing Township. And we already made a deposition to City Council, Town Council, June 1st, and we're looking at property. So that's what's coming up again locally next. So I'm equally excited about 3 things, the Abbey, the 400, and this eco-village thing. So anyway, that's me. Now I'm done. Thank you. Thank you all for being here. I barely kept it into 15. I don't think I did. But I tried my very best. And my final encouragement, really do consider the words of Jesus and what he's actually looking for from people. And he's extremely clear. I can't say it more simply than that. And thank you for being here, guys. Enjoy the rest of your time.
I am recording, so State of California wants me to make that clear.
I have
How
a
are
little
you today?
Nervous.
Nervous? Oh, don't be nervous. I do this a lot. This is easy. It'll go very well. I have a special guest today. Do you go by your full name or Scott, or what do you usually do?
Whichever people prefer.
Okay, so I've got Scotland Morrison, and you are what's your official title at Urban Abbey?
I go by several. I'm an abbot, as well as head of staff, as well as chairman of the board.
Wow, that's very interesting. You have sort of a corporate you have a couple of corporate titles and a fairly traditional ecclesiastical title.
Yeah, I'm also a fan of a quote by Machiavelli, which says, men honor titles, titles do not honor men. And I love that quote to death.
I'm going to write that one down. I usually take notes as I do this. And we are talking today because there's an event coming up next September where you're now, what's the best thing to call Urban Abbey? Shall we call it a church? Shall we, what do you guys call yourself?
We call ourselves an abbey.
Actually. An abbey. Okay.
Yeah.
And you are hosting an event, which I will be there, and Jonathan Peugeot will be there, and John Vervaeke will be there, and another local scholar who will be there who doesn't have a YouTube channel, and we'll all be in conversation.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. I think it's going to be fantastic.
And so when I got the invite for that, I asked, who's in charge of this outfit? And can I talk to him?
Yeah.
And your sister put you forward. So here we are.
Here we are.
So let's first, most of the people watching know something about me. A little bit later, we'll have plenty of time to, do you have any hard deadlines that we have to finish by?
I do not. We could go Joe Rogan style. I'm in for the long haul.
Okay. Well, I've got stuff a little later in the day, so we'll probably go between 1 and 2 hours. So that's what we'll shoot for.
Depends on how interesting I am.
I can already tell you're interesting. I'm interested. So, well, let's begin with you.
Okay.
Tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we'll go into how you were raised, religion, all that kind of stuff. So that's usually the way I do it.
Okay, so my wife has helped me fine tune this delivery. Essentially, I would go for too long, too often, and she's like, "You got to shorten this story, Scott. You got to bring it down."
I'll be the judge of too long. You just go right ahead.
Okay. So I was actually born in Thunder Bay, where this conference is occurring. My grandfather on one side of the family, on my mom's side, was a Baptist minister for 35 years at Beresford Baptist Church. Grandfather on the other side was a firefighter. So both in the city. I was born in Thunder Bay, but at two years old, my family, we moved to southern Ontario. And my dad was working for a computer company called Digital Equipment in the 1980s. Then a lot of my story is my parents' story, naturally, because I'm dragged along as a willing and unwilling victim. Not a victim, actually, but my parents are both serving in a Baptist church there, Hessler Baptist Church. I think you're getting a recurring theme here. But my mom, Kimberly, was a youth leader there. My dad, Bill, he was working in children's ministry. They get a call when I'm about 7 years old to go into Christian camping. They had their dream house, 2 cars, the whole deal. He was doing the 80s computer tech thing with the flashy suits and whatnot. And we basically descend from that into missionary poverty, just at the edge, depending on God for everything. So tons of stories about that. But we end up in the interior of British Columbia at a place called Lake of the Trees Bible Camp, and my parents become full-time Christian camp directors. That dynamic plays until I'm about 12 years old. During that time, my parents, they loved doing Bible camp, but they also loved doing the counselor training. And they would actually go for about 3 weeks before camp would start. They'd get their team, they'd start training for 3 weeks. They got these 2 crazy guys called Franz and Wes. And one of them was former Green Beret. Another guy was Outward Bound. And they did this thing where it was team development activities, push you to your, extremes, and then you grow together as a team. And anyway, so my parents are really kind of like loving the discipleship, team development stuff. They start writing camp curriculum. Limit training was a thing that they had done, life ministry training. And so a bunch of Bible camps in Canada started using it. But then my mom's older sister had come back from the mission field. She was in Papua New Guinea for a number of years. So they're like, let's do something together. Let's go to somewhere else together, and we're going to do like a discipleship school. And my dad's strategy was, I'm just going to jump into the car with my brother-in-law. We're just going to start driving east. And when we feel that God is like, this is the spot, then we'll just stop, and this is the spot. As crazy as that is. So anyway, so we end up in Pinawa.
I love it.
Okay. We end up in Pinawa, Manitoba, which is a nuclear waste disposal testing ground for the government of Canada, in that, like, in those rocks that are far, far, far down under the surface, and they're trying to bury the chemical waste and stuff. So my parents started up a discipleship school there for 2 years. So that's my grade 9 and grade 10. Then they're like, hey, we're spending so much time on other people's kids. Our kids are getting older. I've got an older sister, 1.5 years older than me, Sarah, myself, then Catherine, who you've spoken to. She's 1.5 years younger than me. And then I've got a baby brother who's 3 years younger. So we're all like 1.5 years spaced out. They're like, we're spending so much time with other people's kids. Let's focus on our kids a little more. Let's change it up a little bit. We end up in Apple Valley in the high desert in Southern California for a year. Presbyterian Church of the Valley, I think.
Wow.
So I go from, like, middle of nowhere, interior of BC, to small town Pinawa, Manitoba, to Southern California, where we've got like security guards, sheriff's offices packed, like part of the school, razor wire. The school security guards had like rear view mirrors on their bike helmets so that they could see if they were getting jumped from behind. Living in what was called felony flats, just like, okay, crazy. So, but it was really good, really good. And then from there, my grandfather, who was still a pastor of a Baptist church here, his heart starts failing. And so there were some issues coming up in I don't know if it was the PCUSA or the whatever. The Presbyterian Church was going through its own kind of like thing. So then my parents moved to, actually we made one stop before that. We go to Winkler Bible Camp, which is a Mennonite camp in Manitoba. My parents run a year-long discipleship program there. They put their foot down a little bit on some Neil Anderson teaching that the camp director wanted to ram down everyone's throat. And they're like, no, we're not teaching this stuff. And so he's like, then you're leaving. And they're like, okay, fine, we'll leave. So then my grandfather's heart was failing. So my dad goes and takes over his church for a while, but basically escorts it gently into gentle repose. And while we're there, now I had just turned 18. Graduated from high school. My parents start up a discipleship school in Thunder Bay. So I attend that for 2 years. Then I meet my wife, who's my older sister's age. She's 1.5 years older. And actually her parents had gone to the same youth group as my parents. So it was like family friend kind of thing, but she was always older than me, my older sister's league, right? And until you hit your like 20s or whatever, that's too old to be considered. But then I'm like, oh. So, and so then funny story. We used to have this Baptist pastor from Tennessee flown up, his name's Mark Webb, flown up to do like our family camp in BC. So he was actually a guest speaker at my wife's Baptist church. And he was friends with not only my parents, but my wife's parents. So we were going to the summer conference together, and he's speaking. And then afterwards, it's the classic Baptist potluck kind of like midsummer, communicable diseases just everywhere all over that potluck table. But this guy, Mark Webb, he's like, Scott, Jen's single, you're single. What's wrong? What's going on? I'm like, all right, I'll ask
Make
her
it
for
happen.
coffee. Okay, I'll ask her for coffee. So that happened. So then we get married. So I get married a month after I turned 20. So I'm just like, let's go
Married
for it.
young.
Let's do it. Yep. And what had happened was there was this thing called the Sovereign Grace Movement. You may be familiar. C.J. Mahaney and all that.
Yeah.
Now this is going back 14 years. So before, and we don't need to get into it, but before all the disaster. Actually, I was following Warren Throckmorton for quite a while, his posts on Patheos, I think. Primarily about Mark Driscoll in later years, but I mean, he details some of this stuff I did. So they're like, hey, and what had happened was my parents are more the dynamic pioneers than they are the settler type. So you may have noticed in their narrative, they're popping around. So then they are running this discipleship school still, small. It has like 14 students. They moved back to Southern California. And I'm skipping some parts of the story. I can't make it a comprehensive thing, right? But essentially, myself and my older sister take over this discipleship school that they had. I'm like, Dad, what am I supposed to teach for an hour and a half every day? He's like, son, I've left you my Matthew Henry commentary set. Just quote from that. So I'm like, okay. So I'm kind of doing that. We encounter strange people, as you would if you have a discipleship school for 14. And so, but I loved some of these guys, and I'm like, this is beyond my skill set. I'd spent years as like a youth guy. I always liked the one-on-one mentoring stuff. My parents sort of poured a lot of that into me based on like what they had gone through. So then I'm like, you know what? I can't run this school anymore. My sister's like, she's like 22. I'm 21. Some of our students are older than we are. I'm like, you know, and I'm like, no, I'm out. I can't do it. I can't do it. So I'm like, Mom and Dad, I really want to do like counseling. So what do you think? And they're like, well, we'll ask some of our new Sovereign Grace friends who they had met in Minneapolis. And we really like the worship music. And there's a few, you know, surface level, it all seemed great. And they're like, hey, these Sovereign Grace guys recommend CCEF with Ed Welch, David Powlison, out of Westminster Seminary in the Philadelphia area.
Oh, yeah. And you're talking their counseling stuff.
Yeah.
Okay. Yep.
So then I apply to go down there. I get accepted. So my wife and I, we moved down to the Philadelphia area, not knowing anybody, except we got plugged into a Sovereign Grace church, and our landlords were like Sovereign Grace, like Bible study leaders. So we get our community group right up front. We get our apartment right up front. I don't even have a cell phone. I'm commuting we were living in Souderton, which is about 40 minutes outside Philly. So I'm commuting up these American highways and stuff and driving into like pristine Glenside. And then you see like these mansions that these campuses are on, right? It's like the guy who made Dickies workwear. That's where CCF is based out of his personal mansion. And it's right across the street from Westminster. And so it was pretty cool. And then we get involved in our Sovereign Grace Church. So I go to CCF for 2 years, taking Christian counseling, get 4 counseling certificates, i.e. they're useless. As far as like wanting like good information, great. Never told up front, hey man, you know what? This isn't going to help you anywhere. Like you can't get a job with 4 counseling certificates from CCF as an adjunct from Westminster. And I'm 22 and I'm an idiot and I don't know. But it was really good. So we were going to this Sovereign Grace church. And you know what? Really liked the church. Liked the people there. Some strange dynamics. Okay. 99% of the kids were homeschooled. Their youth group, they had a mandate. They didn't allow kids to come to youth group unless they brought their parents with them. the parents would sit on the left side of the room. The kids would sit on the right side of the room for like the teaching. The parents are like, you are never out of your parents' like sight.
Wow.
So that was a little strange.
Yeah.
Then there was a few things that happened. So I did my 2 years, and the guys. What happened was a guy had come down from Ottawa, Canada, and he wanted to do a Sovereign Grace church plant in Ottawa. And they're like, okay, come here for a year, then go to our pastor's college, shave your head bald like CJ and Joshua Harris. Do that bit, and then go do your church plant in Ottawa. But you got to do the year internship and then the year in school.
Yeah.
So in my second year of school, this guy, Zach Martin, comes down. He does his internship. Then he goes to their pastor's college. While he's going to their pastor's college, they're like, Scott, you know what? Maybe you could go up there with him. You want to do ministry? He could use another church planting buddy. You've been with us for 2 years now. Why don't you intern here? He does the pastor's college. You go together. I'm like, cool, let's do that. Sounds great. A couple of things came up during my internship. I saw some of the underworkings of what was going on, and I was like, oh, there's too many troubling things, and I couldn't even necessarily put it like a finger on it. One of the things that came up was, so now I'm an intern. I'm sitting in these day-long pastors meetings they'd have every week on Tuesdays at Starbucks and different restaurants. And as we're drinking coffee and eating lunch on the church's dime, this poor woman had donated to the church after an ask, and then she asked for some of her money back because she had fallen on hard times. She's like, hey, I need some of it back. I overgave. And in the meeting,
Haitian church.
and in the meeting, there was to be fair, there was a variety of opinions. Okay, so
That's there would be.
But at the end of the day, it was, she gave the money to the Lord. He can provide if she needs to be provided for. She doesn't get her money back. And I was ticked. That was the you know what, guys? And we're sitting there, and basically she's paying for us to have this coffee and this, and I'm just like, no. So I'm out. So anyway, so I'm like, but you know what? I feel like God's calling me to Ottawa to do a church plant anyway. And as I'm thinking about this, I'm in the shower, and I'm going to talk to you. I'm not a super charismatic person. There's a couple. I've been reading James K. Smith's book on Augustine a little bit.
Okay.
He's talking about journeying through the darkness, and you've got a couple constellation bright points where you have this encounter with God, and it's like enough to guide you, because you don't get those all the time, right? At least I'm not the kind of person who gets it all the time. So I'm going to talk about a couple of these charismatic encounters. And some would even say that's just child's play. But anyway, so I'm in
Trust
the
me, there'll
shower.
be plenty of commentary all over this story. I know it already, and I love it. This is
Okay.
wonderful. Keep going. You're doing
Okay.
great.
Okay. So I'm in the shower, and this verse pops into my head, because I'm like, God, I'm going to go do this thing anyway. You've called me. And at this point, I'm on the Mark Driscoll Acts 29 bandwagon.
Oh, okay.
I'm like, yeah, Mark Driscoll's cool. He's got this Jesus is my homeboy shirt, and he's just happening. And then one time he shows up with a hoodie, and I'm like, I own that hoodie. Okay, yeah, okay, we're it's like, be the man. You know what? You can be the man. You can do a church plant. Don't be a loser playing video games
you are
in your
Forrest
basement.
Gumping your way all over Young, Restless, and Reformed.
I had what was his the Jesus Church thing? He had a book. I had a signed copy. I had signed copies of his books. But so I'm in the shower, and I'm like, God, I'm going to go do this church plant. And then this verse drops into my head. I do not attempt things that are too great for me. It just drops in. And I'm like, no, God, that's not you. And then again, I do not attempt things that are too great for me. It's in Psalm somewhere, I think. I'm like, no, that can't be real. That can't be real. Whatever. I'm still going to go do this thing. So I'm like, okay, Jenny, we're going to go do this thing. And we go up to the Ottawa area. Oh, okay. I got to include one. So I become a Starbucks barista to work while I do this church plant.
You'd be bivocational. Great bivocational strategy.
Oh,
Meet
yeah.
lots of people, plant the church. Perfect.
Yep. And then we hit up Acts 29 Church Planting Network. There's these guys in Troy, New York. Love them. Seriously good dudes. But part of the Acts 29 Church Planting Network thing back then, they may have changed policy then, was you can go up a certain level in the application process, and then you need a congregation of 60 people. And for me, I'm like, I don't need you guys at 60 people. 60 people, that's sustainability right there. So I'm like, okay, that's a broken model. I'm just gonna say it. Now, again, also broken is a guy who goes up to do a church plant when God plants in his head, I do not attempt things too great for me, but okay, we're just all broken around here. So here's what happens. I've got my guys. I've got about 6 families. They're all kind of like me though, young, broke. Their wives are like pulling them out of my meetings because they're like, so-and-so is acting. I'm like sitting down in a restaurant with like my 6 guys. We got blueprints for, it was going to be cafe, skate park in the back. Then we can do church in the cafe. Some of my guys had cafeteria type experiences, whatever. So then what happens is, I'm like, okay, but guys, you know what? We can't do church quite yet because we don't have enough people. So let's just go to another church together because I'm working full time. I'm doing Bible studies and stuff, but I can't pull off a service, or we didn't have the alliance or connection to properly do that. So we start going to this little church in this little theater in Canada, Ontario, which is just outside of Ottawa. And we're going there for a few weeks. And I had now been doing this for 2 years. I've got 2 kids. I haven't been around family for 5 years now. I'm trying to do this church plant thing. And we had connected with the Canadian Southern Baptists. Didn't end up panning out. I didn't know that. Anyway, no, that might be too personal for, anyway. So not for me, but for someone else. So I don't want that.
Got it.
So
Got it.
It didn't work out. I'm bringing my guys and their families to this small church plant in Ottawa area. And then all of a sudden, we're like 3 weeks in, and it's one of these small churches where you go up for communion, then you come back. And my guys come to me and they're like, Scott, we just took communion behind Carrie Underwood because she was dating Mike Fisher, who is playing for the Ottawa Senators. So they're dating, they're engaged. Mike Fisher was going to a mega church in Ottawa, but the story is 20 women every week at least would show up trying to hook up with him at church because they knew he was an NHL player at church. So Mike Fisher, to his credit, I suppose, and I heard this, third hand, said, I'm not doing this anymore. I'm going to go where I can just be obscure and anonymous and in a small little place so that I can actually like worship and, so good on him. But now my guys are like, oh, we're going to this small little church plant. We got some celebrities hanging out here. This is like amazing. At the same time, I go to one of my best friends of old, Colin Slade. He gets married from California. He was my high school friend. He gets married in the foothills of San Diego, okay? In this like amazing ranch. I'm looking out between the mountains and you can like just see the ocean glimmering through. And he's got like 150 friends and family and everybody's so connected. And I'm like, the next week I'm slinging trash into a Starbucks bin at like 7 a.m. It's like 30 below Ottawa, middle of winter. My guys are enchanted by Carrie Underwood. I'm like, you know what? I'm out, man. I'm done. So then what happens is, I'm like, okay, well, where am I going to go? My in-laws, let's get connected back to some family. Let's get some support. I'm burned out. I'm tired. So my in-laws were living here in Thunder Bay still. And at this point, my mom had just taken on a job in White Rock, BC, just south of Vancouver. And my dad was running like a painting business. Very small, just him and my brother and the occasional worker. And I'm like, you know what? I'm going to actually get an actual degree in psychology through Athabasca, work with my dad, do school part-time, and do that. So then I make the call and we go. Now, the way my marriage works, I think I've made maybe 3 decisions where I don't really, like, I make the decision and then I talk about it with my wife. Now, this was one of them. We're going to get to more, but this was one of them. So then I'm just like, we're moving. And at that point, Jenny, my wife, she was like, yeah, she understood it. She didn't mind. So then we move. I'm painting. I'm going to school, going to this Alliance church. Then all of a sudden, my mom's the women's pastor there, and we're leading a Bible study. There's about 15 families in it. And then one by one, they're like, hey, there's this new church plant. It's called Village Church in Surrey. And we love the pastor, Mark. He's super dynamic. Can we go to that church, but still go to this Bible study? And I'm like, well, the choice is yours. I don't care. That's fine. Like, whatever. They're like, well, now that it's okay, can we just talk about it for a minute? So then they just like talk about how amazing it is. Next week, another couple. We're actually going to this church now too. Can we? Yep. So eventually, the entire community group, except for Jenny and myself, have like moved over to this other church. And my uncle lives in BC, and he had a friend. And Jenny and I go to my uncle's 40th birthday party because he's quite a bit younger than my father. And I meet this man and his girlfriend, and we're driving them home. We'd never even met them. We're just driving them home. And they say to us, we haven't been to church in over 30 years, but we both want to start going somewhere. We'll go wherever you take us. And Jenny and I were like, oh. And then we're like, well, I don't think the Alliance Church is really a fit. Let's go check out this new thing and see what could come of that. So we go to this Village Church thing, and they're meeting in a gym. There's 300 people per service. There's 3 services a day. There's people standing out in the rain with like umbrellas, just craning. It's like, and I'm like, okay, you know what? If I'm going to bring somebody, it's here. So then we do. And then I meet, this was, back, I guess Village Church had like 900 people at this point in this gym. And so I go and I talk to Mark, the pastor. I'm like, listen, my whole community group defected. We go for like coffee. I'm like, my whole community group defected. There's this couple who want to come get us to bring them to church. So I just wanted to explain or let you know if there's, some additional new faces, this is where we're coming from. I didn't know that the Alliance Church was bleeding about 1,000 people. There was another large church in the area that, because of moral failures, a huge chunk of that church was emptying out and all into Village, right? So so a misconception that a lot of people have is that mega churches have all these conversions.
Right.
That's not technically accurate in many cases.
In many cases.
Right. Many cases.
Yeah.
So basically it's 900 Alliance Church people, this other church. It's kind of like Walmart showing up, setting up, and now all the mom and pops are closing down. I was actually going to Carey Seminary, and I'm in this course for spiritual direction, and this is like a couple years later, and I'm talking about my job and what I'm doing, and I work at Village Church, and this woman's like, yeah, my husband and I were trying to do a church plant in Langley, and Village Church set up a campus, and we lost over half our people, so I don't know if we're going to survive the year. I was like, I'm so sorry.
This is the scene. I know it well. Yep.
So, but I'm skipping ahead. So I meet with Mark. He's like, okay, Then he comes back to me and he's like, listen, we're moving to a new campus. It seats 1,100 people. But it's 10 minutes down the road. My current community groups guy, I want him to stay here to shepherd the people who don't want to move from this location. And I want you, if you'd be willing, to be the community group's intern. So to be clear, I never advanced past intern stage. Okay. But community group's intern. And I was like, okay, sounds great. Sounds great. And at this point, my parents had once again moved to California again. So they're at this point back in California. My brother, he thinks working like 10 a.m. till about 3 p.m. is a good hard work day. And I'm like, I can't do business with this guy the way he's working. So I was ready to jump back into ministry. So I start doing community groups at Village Church. I do that for 2.5 years. Village grows by 1,000 people a year. I think they're still doing that. I left 4.5 years ago. They're doing campuses and all kinds of stuff. But while I'm there, I begin to experience all the angst of being in a mega church and just seeing. So here's the thing. I have friends. They invite their friends to an Easter service. We're hanging out afterwards. And my one friend asked the invited person, hey, are you going to come back? Do you think you're going to come back? And the guy says, well, of course I'm going to come back. There's so many beautiful people here. And it's based in White Rock, but also Surrey, ultra rich, ultra wealthy. My brother, he's like, dude, I go to the club and women are dressed more modestly at the club than they are here. He's like, I don't know what's going on. He's like, I can't even handle it here. And my struggle is not just Village, but any large, excellence was the mantra.
Yes.
Excellence.
Yes.
And you're getting books by Pixar and Disney for the excellence, for the experience, you got to have the branded umbrellas when you walk out to bring people into the church, and you've got your parking team and you've got everything color coordinated. There's no questions in anybody's mind. They know where they're going to go.
Yeah, Willow Creek built this thing. Yep.
And so I'm existing in that until they hired a professional counselor. I was doing a ton of counseling. I was mentoring about 16 guys. We were doing a Sunday evening thing where guys could come and do speaking or share what's on their heart, because there wasn't many outlets in this model. It's like either you're the best or you can't even be on stage, right? That's just, and my question is, and not just for Village, because I still like Mark. But the question is, when you're bringing people into the church, what are they being converted into? What is the appeal? What is being taught, or not taught, shown? And it's like, worship team, everybody's a 9 out of 10 on the attractiveness scale. They're showing up in their convertible Lexuses. They've got contracts pending in the music industry. You're hiring your worship guys from downtown New York. They're like ginger Jesuses. You've got, Mark, and everything's just like pow, 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 pow. And it's like you bring in a regular dude, and he walks in and he's like, so this is what being a Christian means. So this is what following Jesus looks like. And it doesn't matter what content your sermon has. You're impeccable. You're successful. You're everything. And so I was just, my heart was just breaking. So anyway, so 2.5 years, I start buying books on neo-monasticism.
About what year are we at right now?
We're talking March of 2015.
Okay.
March 2015.
Okay.
So I'm buying different books on neo-monasticism, contemplative communities, prayer. I pick up, Brother Lawrence's book, The Practice of Prayer, and I'm like, okay. I'm also paying attention to Warren Throckmorton's continual blog of the fall of Mark Driscoll. I'm getting interesting input from the other pastors in the church about their opinion on that, how they think he's being unfairly treated. The funds he's using for his book promotions to get on the best sellers list in the New York Times is completely legitimate because it's promoting his church's image because he is the church. And I'm just like, no. So I'm going through a little bit of a crisis. I'm like, okay, what am I going to do? What's going to go on? And I'm not sure. And so then Mark's about to make an important decision. And he asks me my opinion on the decision. He takes me out for coffee. And I'm a yes man. Some people don't like the Enneagram, but I'm a 9. Peacemaker. 9, wing 8. Okay, challenger. But 9. I've learned that sometimes I have to tell people I'm probably going to agree with most of what you say in the moment if you push me on it. So give me, present, and then give me some time to reflect so that I can come back. Now, that's kind of chipping away as I'm living in this role that I'm in right now. But that was me primarily. So Mark's like, I want to do this. And here's all the reasons why. And I'm like, So then my mom is sick or ill, had fallen ill. And at this point, what had happened was my parents had moved to Thunder Bay. They were living in the East End, which is the worst part of town, or the most socially deprived part of town. And they're trying to start up a church. They're trying to do a community initiative, maybe a community library, childcare services, church services, like this kind of like grassroots thing. My mom was like finishing up her PhD from Fuller Seminary. She's now working on a second PhD, but that's another topic because she is a mind, brilliant mind. And so I just know they're trying to do this thing in Thunder Bay. And I know my parents have always got something on the go. So I find out from my dad or my sister, oh, mom's not doing well. So I'm like, I'm just going to drop by and give a surprise visit. Let my dad know, but don't let my mom know, and surprise her and just be there for a couple of days. So I get on this plane and I didn't have any good books on me. I think I'd forgotten my Kindle. And so I had prayed. I said, you know what, God, I'm going to be like an hour and a half in the air. Talk to me. If you want to talk to me, I'm here. Tell me something. I want to hear. So I'm flying. And so then I, start praying. And this is one of those bright points, right? A message comes through. If you do what I'm asking you to do, I'm going to take care of you. And I was like, oh, okay. I didn't really like the sound of that though. Because, well, first of all, I had a follow-up email I wanted to send to Mark. And I was like, do I send it? Do I not send it? He's not going to be happy about it. I don't want him to be unhappy with me. So I'm like, okay, God, I'll send it. So I arrive, see my parents, say hi, whatever, pull out my laptop, send a response to the conversation we had, send it. But that kind of pressing emotion or whatever you would say, there was no release in that. It was still there. And I'm like, okay, well, this is kind of weird. I thought I would have followed God and then, rest easy. But no, there's still something there. So then my parents say, Scott, you know what? We're going to go to this First Baptist Church. Now, I know you know it because your sister was a youth leader there for a year. And I've been there a couple times. And I remember seeing my wife there before we were even dating for like a food drive at Halloween. And she was actually dressed up as Braveheart with like the blue face and like a two-handed sword because she's got curly hair. So she had like the curly hair, like Mel Gibson did. So that was kind of cool back in the day. But anyway, So I was like, yeah, I know First Baptist Church. Okay. It's like big, old, musty. And they're like, yeah, we put in a proposition because your dad has done this like roofing and renovations company in Thunder Bay while my mom was finishing up her PhD while they're trying to do all these other things. And there's a guy called Andrew who's still with the Abbey, a young guy at the time, he's 22. And his parents are on the board and they're trying to figure out what they want to do with this church building because they can't afford to keep the church open and pay their pastor. And my mom was like, you know what? I'm going to write up a 9-page proposal, tell them I want it to be an Abbey, and this is what it's going to be. And she does it in a matter of hours. And so then sends it into the meeting. And they actually agree. They're like, okay. And my parents are like, you got to give us the building, just straight up, just give it to us. And they're like, okay. So my parents are like, Scott, let's take a tour through this building that has just been given to us that we're going to move into. And when I say move into, like they literally moved into it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So I'm like, okay. So then we start walking through, and it's like old, dusty church. Everything needs to be redone. And they're like, this is what we're going to do. We're going to pull out all the pews. It's going to be a community space. See this tower thing that's never been nobody's actually been up there since the 50s. They don't even have, there's nothing there but like floor joists and pigeon crap and bricks. That's going to be a 24-hour day prayer tower. And we're going to have residence for people in need here. And we're going to feed the poor, and we're going to do this, we're going to do this, we're going to do this. They lay out the whole thing as we go room by room by room. And I'm just like, yeah, okay. That's okay. And they're like, in 5 or 6 years, maybe you can come and take over when we're kind of like done. And I was like, yeah, that seems like nepotism, heir apparent kind of stuff. No, thank you. So I'm like, and at this point, you know, with all kudos to Mark and to Village Church, they're paying 85% of my master's degree as I'm taking a spiritual formation course from Carrie. They're giving me paid time off to like be at the classes and do stuff. They're taking care of me. And I'm doing all kinds of stuff for them too, but they're taking care of me, and I'm set up in Surrey, and I love Surrey. I love the West Coast. I hate snow, the cold, all that. So then my parents, after taking me through, they're like, hey, let's go to your dad's favorite breakfast spot in the States, because it's like 45 minutes south. So we're driving down there, and a thought pops into my head, and it's, this project is so huge. They need more people here. So what if I quit my job and moved here to help them? And so like the second that thought comes in, peace. I'm like, are you kidding me?
I love it.
I'm like, are you kidding me? And then I was like, all right. And it's one of those things where it's like, now here's the second time. Maybe now we're up to number 3. I don't think. I text my wife because we're in the States. And I'm like, hey, Jenny, we're moving to Thunder Bay. And she responds back, it's a good thing that I love you. That's...
I guess so. If I did that to my wife, I think there'd be blood.
So yeah. So what happens is I tell my parents, okay, I'm gonna come, I'm gonna help you, I'm gonna move. And my dad had this tiny little house that he just finished renovating. And his current tenant was just moving out. He's like, hey, we can move you into this place right away. So I fly back to Surrey, and the next day I walk into Mark's office and I'm like, hey man, I'm quitting. I gotta go do this thing. I'm out. do my 2 weeks. And the next day, I already have my truck packed, and I flew my family out. I didn't want them to have to go through the whole road trip.
Yeah.
And I'm driving a moving van across Canada, and I'm here in Thunder Bay. And I go from everybody wants to be my friend because I'm one of the paths to power as a community groups guy. It's like, oh, if you want to jump into Village Church and you want to start Ascension, how do you do that? Oh, you become a community group leader. Okay. Volunteer at the community group desk. We've got a whole, right? Make those connections, baby. So I go from that to the first day at the Abbey is, let's go into the grungy old kitchen, pull out all the plates and utensils and everything, start washing them and start taking an account of what we actually have to work with. And that's day one.
What happened to the Baptist church? Did they just disband or go to a new facility, or what did they do?
So part of the agreement was we agreed that they could meet in their sanctuary for a full year.
Okay.
And we would absorb, I think we absorbed the cost of the building day one, but they still have a year, and then they could find another location.
And what was your seed money?
My
you
parents.
took the building.
Yeah. Yep. My parents.
Wow.
Yeah. So basically, my dad had a couple like projects he had been working on.
Yeah.
Houses that he had bought, renovated, restored, sold all of them. All of it. So everything that the Abbey operated on for the first 2.5 years was basically my parents selling everything and putting it into like the Abbey account.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's where the seed money came from. And then they eventually took out even like some loans from personal friends that they're still paying off to this day.
Wow. So you would get into the kitchen, you're starting to take inventory. Okay, what do we have here?
And so then, and that's part of like the journey down, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And because I remember you mentioned that recently. I've been introduced to you lately, so I'm trying to.
There's a lot of videos out there.
Oh, dude, yeah. But I love your content. It's actually really good. And so what happens is there's this Anglican mission connection where, and this is what happened. I forgot this one part. I had my 2-week time period. There's a guy called Kalen Alkema. Hope I'm not getting his name wrong. And he had just come back from Surf the Nations, which is like YWAMI in Hawaii. Somehow he had gone to this conference. Francis Chan was there, and Francis Chan laid his hands on him and gave him the gift of prophecy. So he comes back to Village Church, and all of a sudden it's like the Spirit's moving in the youth group, and there's like hundreds of kids like just like laid out. And Ben, who was the youth guy at the time, he's like, "Listen, Scott, you're leaving. You got to talk to Kalen because he spoke over me, and it's changing the way I'm doing ministry. So I want him to speak to you." And again, I'm like, okay, sure. It's like,
yeah.
I don't say no. Like I never say no. I'm just, okay. I've never spoken in tongues or that kind of thing. But of course it's possible and great and all that. Just not me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Who knows?
Oh God. Oh boy. So Kalen, so I go talk to Kalen. I'm like, "Hey man, I need you to say something for me. Message from God. It would be great, whatever." It's like, "Okay, well, it doesn't just work that way. You gotta I gotta wait and you gotta give me some time." I'm like, okay. So then I ask him every couple of days and he's still like, "No, don't have anything. I'm like, okay. And then I go up to him and I'm like, "Kalen, this is my last day here." He's like, "Okay." He's like, "Let's make it happen. Let's go to the parking lot." I'm like, "Okay." He's like, "Okay, Scott, just stand there. Close your eyes and hold out your hands like you're going to receive a gift." I'm like, "Okay." So I do. And he does the same. And then he just like closes his eyes and just thinks for a minute. And he's like, okay. He's like, I've got 3 images for you. I'm like, great. He's like, the first is of a ship in a storm. And you don't know what's going on or why things are so stormy, but you're moving through this storm. And the second is of an archer. And actually, he said javelin thrower. Javelin thrower. God is throwing you like a javelin exactly where he wants you to go. I'm like, okay, this is all pretty generic so far. And then third is of a tree. And you are this tree, and there are many smaller trees growing up underneath you. I said, okay, thanks, Kaylin. Like, okay. And I'm just like, that doesn't really mean a whole lot to me. He knows where I'm going. You know, like, this is all pretty generic. My mildly pessimistic to some of the charismatic creeps in, and I'm just like, okay. So then I'm like, thank you, nice. Tell my wife about it. Okay. So then we're only at the Abbey for 2 or 3 months, and then we start getting in connection with the Anglican mission. My mom was friends with this one woman who was going to an Anglican mission church in White Rock. So we're like, well, let's just go check them out. Anglican is Abbey-like. They're kind of in that, you know, English stream of things. And so we go, and then this is the piece where they had this one guy who was a bit of a prophet, I suppose. Like, not one of those like, whoa, I'm a prophet, but too many of those. But
Yeah.
so anyway, so he says, hey, it's the end of our first evening. You know, it's been a long day. We're all coming from different places. If you'd like just to come forward for prayer for sleep, just come forward for prayer for sleep. But we'll also have, if you want a prophetic word or something, there's some people at the front, and come up and we'll pray for you. So Jenny gets up, my wife gets up to go. And there's like a line of like 30 people in front, and we're just kind of like, you know, at the back. And I'm like, yeah, I'm not getting up. I'm not into this kind of thing. And I don't ever have a problem sleeping, so I'm good to go. So then there was this guy, Joshua Sudo, up at the front. He looks at Jenny and I. We've never even spoken, and he walks right up to us, past the whole line. And he's like, you know, I'm kind of new to this thing, but God just gave me 3 images for you guys. And I was like, okay. And he's like, the first is of a ship in a storm, and the second is of an archer, and God has shot you, and you're an arrow, and the third is of a tree. So,
okay, Lord,
like,
pick on somebody else.
So that happens, and so of course, like, I'm encouraged. You know, you only need a couple of things like that. Yeah. To be like, that's sustainable enough. And even though it's been a hard and rough ride for lots of different reasons, I know that I'm where God wants me to be. And so that's enough for me. And everything else is like secondary. And so I just try to live into the calling that he has called me into. And that's why I also really like the, you know, men honor titles do not honor men. Like, God calls you into something, and it's never something that you hold on to as though it's something that you can wield. It's a huge responsibility you have to live up to. And I know myself, I need something like that. Otherwise I'd be a floater. I feel a close heart connection with God. So I don't naturally operate in like any kind of urgency or desperation or needing shows of anything. You know, I'm pretty passive sometimes and happy. I'm a pretty happy person, passive and happy. Hard to shake me, into action unless I have to. So I have a lot of I have tos.
But also
so
very willing. I mean, you get that from, I love your story. I love, boy, I love your parents, just hearing about them and their heart and their willingness and their commitment. It's just thrilling. And I completely understand that the real life people are also complicated and all of that, because, I had amazing parents too. My father stayed in one place, but for most of his, which probably my mother made him, but that was a good thing. So wow. I love your story. I am so glad you didn't tell me the short version.
Yeah, dude, I did not keep it to like the 20 minutes. We're already an hour in. I'm sorry.
No, you did not. And I am very, very okay with that. I've loved every minute of this, and this has been great, and I'm glad I recorded it. And something like this is the kind of story that needs to be told and recorded and accessible for people to listen to, because a story like this inspires people to do all the right things, and a lot of crazy things that probably will end in shipwreck and things like the Apostle Paul had to suffer. But that's the way this thing goes. So I love how you did sort of Forrest Gump through the entire, both through the seeker movement and the emergent movement, I love it. I mean, all different sides. You've got the Sovereign Grace folks and the Westminster folks and the seeker corporate, church growing like crazy thing. And now the new monastic thing, which is, of course, in many ways, I was in Australia in March, and the guy who brought me over to Australia, which I thought was just the craziest thing ever, to talk about Jordan Peterson. And then I visit his church, and it's like the building was the first Anglican church or cathedral in Melbourne, Australia. And the pastor is just doing like the traditional Anglican liturgy, and he's just this liturgical nerd. And of course, Australia is just, swamped by Hillsong. And he's just all like, all the Anglican churches, they're all doing Hillsong. And I said, dude, your day is coming. Just keep doing it. Trust me, what you're doing now is the new hotness. It's coming your way. It takes a while to get across the Pacific, but it's on its way. So
well, something you kind of mentioned there, what was interesting is there's been some people in my small little congregation who are like, hey, you should be recording your sermons and this and that. But then I'm looking at this movement where people are coming to these events where no cell phones are allowed and no recording takes place. And it's like a once in a lifetime, unique event. And even talking to and hearing from some other people, even knowing that you're going to be recorded changes how you preach.
Absolutely.
Or how you talk, right? And so I'm still pushing back on that. And I'm like, if that seems to be like the trend, why do like the 1980s, 1990s, let's get those cassettes filled with all my sermons and have a catalog sitting in the back? You know what? I think when we took over the First Baptist Church, they had like one of those old like wooden for the catalog of the sermons on cassette, right? You're like, who in their right mind? Like,
those sermons are safe from history in the vast majority of cases. But then again, Tim Keller wouldn't be Tim Keller if it hadn't been for all of those Martin Lloyd-George sermons that he listened to, and so I got my BA in history, and so the historian in me is sort of like, just keep records of some things. But I completely agree with you. Like our meetups we do here at Living Stones, no recording, nothing like that, because it's the wrong. You have to figure out the right thing for the right thing. And But tell me now more about the Abbey. So this has grown, and I did a little bit of the first call that I had, a little bit of poking around because I'm irresistibly nosy.
Sure, yeah. Okay. So I jotted down a couple notes so that I wouldn't be completely off the hip.
Okay.
So obviously, it's an abbey. We try to make that first and foremost.
But beyond the sound of music, I don't think a lot of people know what an abbey is.
Yeah,
because you've
and
got
then
Maria and the Abbey, and that's about it.
yeah, okay. So we go back to St. Patrick. But before that, we go to St. Anthony the Great, the first monastic who goes into the desert. And he hears the sermon of the rich young ruler, and he just goes literal on that. And now he's out in the desert. And then it spawns the church fathers and all those cool church fathers sayings. And this, you're going out into the wilderness to fight your personal demons, and you're going to war. And it takes a very different perspective on spirituality and what a walk with Jesus looks like. And what I find beautiful is in walking in parallel steps with each other are the golden cathedrals in Spain and France where thousands of people died and were murdered to get them to that state. And Christianity becomes a path to power. And then you have the monastics who have a life of poverty and simplicity in its ideal form. I know it can be corrupted. And then you find out the order of Francis of Assisi, the reason why they have their like big sleeves in their robes was so that when people donated money, they could just put it in the sleeve and the monk refused to even touch it.
Wow.
So it's just like,
Yep.
So it's like how, and so one of the pieces is if you ask a person who's outside of the kingdom or who's close to people who are in the kingdom and observing and speaking and saying, what is the narrative of Christianity? According to you, not according to future thinking guests that you would have or other people have on their shows who are deep into the literature and see all kinds of different things. But just your average person, they have a narrative of Christianity and what it means and what it represents. And for many of them, even from my own friends, I hear it's the oldest pyramid scheme in the world.
Wow.
It's path to power. It's primarily men at the top ruling over people.
Yeah.
They don't want to work a real job. They're just fooling people with this religion thing. Yeah. They're hypocrites. You're self-absorbed. You're like cannibalistic. All of these things.
Yeah.
And your lives look no different than anybody else. You've got this. Yeah. You've got the same checklist going on.
Yeah.
Then you pair that with the Canadian experience, with a First Nations approach, where, on a theological perspective, there's a vein of we need to decolonize the church. Reparations to First Nations people looks like giving every church to First Nations communities and walking away. I've got a person who I'm in contact with. She's working on trying to get all the public libraries in Thunder Bay given back to First Nations people, just like straight up given to them. And you have to pull the colonizers out of scripture and all, like just. And so when you say, and then the whole priest situation is just as alive and real in Canada. And then you have the residential schools, which I think you've probably heard of or been familiar with. And so now they talk about the generational trauma that suffered from parents and grandparents in residential schools coming down into their own families to this day. And it's to say that you're a Christian person carries a ton of baggage. And so particularly also with First Nations people, colonizer, residential school person, abuser, part of the system, all of it. So what's interesting is, particularly, so Thunder Bay is a hub city. We're 120,000 people-ish. There's at least 35 First Nations communities north of us who use Thunder Bay as like a hub, as well as to Lookout and a couple other places. But and right now we're between 14 to 17% First Nations is our makeup in this city, and it's the highest rising population because some of the First Nations communities are becoming urbanized and they're coming down into the city. I mean, I know I would. So here's the Abbey story. St. Patrick, as many of you know, is the patron saint of Ireland. He's actually kidnapped as a child, brought to Ireland as a slave. He's a shepherd kind of boy person. He has lots of encounters with God out in the wild. But he also falls in love with his captors and loves their culture and loves who they are. Regardless of that, he still escapes when he's in his teens, gets back home, and then goes to France to get a theology degree. Comes back, but then becomes a missionary to Ireland. What's key to note, though, is the Irish people were tribal, they had their own religion, customs, all of that, right? And so what's interesting is Patrick comes and he actually offers something that those communities embraced and desired. And what's interesting is the Celts had this idea of like sacred spaces. So where like a forest would end and a field would begin, or where like a river would go and the river bank, and on those kind of like, we call them ley lines or whatever, they have this idea of sacred spaces, an understanding of the spiritual very strongly. And so you actually find accounts where Patrick and people would say, if you give us this land to build this church, we'll pray for you. And that was enough of like a, and what was interesting was they were also a warlike community, and they loved the dedication of the monks because they were just as dedicated and hardcore as their warriors were. So they had this like respect. And the Irish missionaries found ways to properly bring in some of the spiritual elements that the Celts had. Like, for example, some people theorize that the Celtic idea of soul friends is a precursor to confession in the Catholic Church. And so the Catholics saw the benefit of it, but then of course, back in the day, wanted the proper authority structures in place for it. And so then they turned it into, well, you can confess to your priest. But they saw this mutual confession piece. And even the early abbots and the monks and nuns in these abbeys would do their hairstyle like the Druids would, and they wouldn't do it like Catholic monks. And so that was one of the complaints that the Catholic Church had against them was, you don't have our hairstyles. You still look like the Druids of that place. But what abbeys was, unlike monasteries, they're a little different than monasteries. Monasteries were more, for a time, a withdrawal from society, cloistered, lives dedicated to study and to religious practice and to battling those demons. Abbeys, it seems, were far more community oriented. You could come and go out of an abbey. You didn't have to like permanently reside there. If you see the ruins of abbeys, there's huge buildings all surrounding them. And that was actually for widows, orphans, the poor. So they'd come into a community, and when they'd build community hubs and resources and build places for art, for culture, for technology to be developed, for like all of these beautiful things. And so when they'd come into a community, the community would say, oh, wow, look at all of what they're bringing to us, and enhancing what we have. And there's always this focus of work and prayer, where you would work and pray, and it wasn't all one or the other. It was like the two pillars of a monastic community. So they shared some pieces of monasticism, but then they had their own abbey expression, and abbeys actually spread from Ireland, some into England, but also into France, Italy, and some of them are still kind of like, their buildings are around. But what we saw in them was a Christian movement that could work hand in hand with the First Nations people of Ireland. primarily by coming into a community and not just preaching good news, but being good news for that community, right? So, and they also, Billy Graham sort of set up, much love to him and all of that, but he set up the believe, behave, belong trajectory. An Abbey has a belong, behave, believe trajectory where it doesn't matter who you are. You can belong here from day one. This can be your home. This can be your community. It doesn't matter where you are on any spectrum. And then once you have found that peace and that safety and security in a community that loves you and cares for you, then your behavior can move from like your survival mechanisms and your like an animal cornered to actual, now you can begin to make some choices for yourself in better circumstances. And possibly some may come to faith through that. Some may not. Never a requirement. I haven't personally had a conversion at the Abbey. We don't really like go for that. Primarily, especially we're 4.5 years old. Scripture talks about the different seasons and what you're called to and what you're called for. Yet many lives are changed. Let's see, I'm just going to throw in just a couple last things before you can jump into questions. Huge emphasis on service and sacrifice, work and prayer, work with the city. And Isaiah 58 is our primary go-to passage, the kind of fasting that God desires, is to feed the hungry, clothe the naked, throw off the chains of oppression. And then it says, and as we look at the state of the church in the West, in Canada, we're losing 30% of our churches in 10 years. CTV came out with that article. It's like, and in Montreal, now this is third-hand information, but the municipality of Montreal has banned new church buildings from being constructed because so many are being emptied out. Their rationale is, why would we let more people build more churches if you can't even sustain the ones that you have? So even from the very beginning, the one difference between my parents and myself was my parents always wanted an Abbey in Thunder Bay. And from day one, I was like, this is a prototype and a model for what Christian communities can do in churches that are emptying out and becoming vacant. You seed them with community, loving, purposed people, and ask your particular community, city, town, what have you always wanted, or what do you need that is not there or needs to be established? And they will tell you. And then you make your purposes every day of the week that, in addition to a Sunday worship expression, but what do you do the other 6 days of the week? And even that day, we do a dementia cafe on Sundays at the Abbey from 2 to 4. And people struggling with dementia and Alzheimer's come in with their caretakers, and we work in correlation with the Alzheimer's Society of Thunder Bay, Lakehead University, and we like pull this thing off together. That's just one very small piece. But and what's interesting is we have filled the Abbey with sacred art. We continue to want more, but there's a couple of particular pieces. One is of Jesus sitting at the Last Supper, and that's down in our like eating room. And then we have Rublev's Trinity up in our cafe, which is essentially symbolic for us of God sitting at the table. And there's that third or that fourth empty space, which is like a welcome, like come and you can sit as well. And then in our prayer tower, to emphasize our belief in thin spaces and special sacred spaces. And we can't quite articulate it, but we just say we believe they exist. In the vein of abbeys of the past is the hand of God reaching to touch the hand of man. And there's the life cosmic energy of God reaching this cold hand of man, which is being warmed by the life of God. So, and although we have between 25 to 40 people who come for our services on Sunday, or our service on Sunday, we have between 1,500 to 2,000 people a week who come through the Abbey. from all the events that we run, the cafe that we have. So Sunday is actually our least busy day as far as like people coming in. So that's one of the like the paradigm shifts, like there's a narrative changes. And so for me, and as you sort of mentioned, the little hits that I've done along the way of different kinds of Christianity expression has caused me I'm deeply passionate about the church. And I love the people of God, and I love God also, like very intensely. And so I want the Abbey to be potentially a rewriting of a narrative for many people, and an alternative means for what could a church look like, or if we were going to plant an intentional community in a city or in a town or wherever. And part of it is the megachurch model works in like large population bases. What do you do in like small town Alberta, small town Saskatchewan, and Montana, whatever? It's like, what's your model? You've got these churches, they're all emptying out. What have you got?
Yeah.
And if you think you're going to put a charismatic man or woman up at the front and they're going to do this thing and it's going to be church as usual and you're going to somehow resurrect that thing, you're not going to resurrect that.
No.
And so, yeah. And, you know, and for me, I don't, you know, when I was younger, and okay, I'm only 36, so that, you know, I am younger, but when I was even younger, when I first tried to do my first church plant, I was like, these are all the things that I'm against. I don't like this. I don't like this. I don't like this. And then I realized I'm not for enough things. All my distinctives were like negative. But what my prayer life looks like, because it's overwhelming, like what I'm engaged in and what my team is engaged in. My prayer life looks like, God, if this is your thing, I'm here and I'm willing, but you have to make it work.
Yeah.
And here's a possible model, but maybe the West is under your judgment. So maybe you don't want this. You don't want these buildings resurrected. You don't want this to happen. But if you do, I'm willing. And I preached about this, which was really interesting. This passage in 2 Kings, I think, where it's the death of Ahab, and and it's this weird little passage where the prophet opens up sort of this piece of the kingdom. It says that God is sitting there with his host of angels, and God says, I want Ahab dead, right? I want him to die. How is that going to happen? So then it says the whole congregation of angels start talking, and it says for some time, they're all thinking about ideas, they're all talking. And then it says one angel comes forward, and God says, okay, so what's their idea? And the angel's like, this is my idea. Blah, blah, blah. I'm going to put a false word in the prophet's mouth, blah, blah. And then God says, okay, sounds good, go do it. And many people use that passage as like, oh, does God cause, like they turn it into this moral quandary as though that might be the point. How I've been reading it, though, is we see all these problems and these issues in the world. The church is failing and disappearing. 40% in the West, 40% of babies born in Thunder Bay are addicted to opiates or other kinds of drugs. We have hundreds of homeless people. We have all of these huge issues. And a lot of people are sitting around and they're like, well, what does God want me to do? What's God called me to do? I don't know what my calling is. And the way I preached this like piece, I said, listen, you have been given eyes to see, spiritual eyes to see too. You can see all of these problems, and God is sitting there saying, what are you going to do about it? Come up with something. And I said, all those angels, they're perfect beings. They have all kinds of amazing ideas. There's like thousands of ideas, but one of them steps forward and says, this is my best shot. And God says, sounds like a good idea. Go ahead and do it. And so my challenge to the people in the Abbey was, here's all of these issues. Here's all of these injustices, and here's all of these people who need help. And I don't think that God wants us to sit and wait for a perfect word, even though, even in my own story, sometimes he like drops it. But he's wanting to see you step forward and say, here's a challenge, and this is a little Jordan Peterson-esque. Here's a burden that I will bear for the kingdom. Here's a challenge that I will take on for the kingdom. And God says, that sounds like a great idea. Go ahead and do it. And God also backs up the angel and says, and I will be with you, like it's my power moving forward. But and that's part of what the Abbey is. And so my heart with even the Abbey model is I just lay that before God and I say, if you want this to be an effective model and a prototype, then let it be. But if you only want one Abbey in Thunder Bay, I'm okay with that too. I'm here. This is your ride. I'm on it, but I can't dictate it or control it.
No.
And I don't want to, and I can't. I don't want to.
No.
I've seen the dangers of like a celebrity pastor stuff, just the dangers that are out there. And I don't think I'm strong enough to resist them.
Yeah.
At this point, especially in my age, maybe when I'm in my 60s. But I hope I don't. So we have a common rule of life because we're a neo-monastic community. I would like to see more abbeys spread, and something that we would share would simply to be a common rule of life. And a big long-term project I'd love to have is a 4-year lectionary based on the 4 Gospels, where you could just, each Abbey community contributes artistically through written word and through songs and prayers and art. And then you build this so that when you say 10 years from now, plant an Abbey in Chicago, and you're like, what are we going to do on Sunday? Because this isn't based on a charismatic leader who's like dynamically engaged. This is just a community coming together. You can, open up your PDF file of the Abbey lectionary and have all the resources you need from 50 other Abbey communities that are like, and then you can begin to pick and choose. This prayer is beautiful. These works of art are beautiful. It's inspired our community to do something similar, and sort of have this network of community-focused people. And right away, from day one at the Abbey, we went before City Council. We made a deposition before City Hall, and we said, we're a new organization here in town. We exist for the good of the community. What do you want us to do? And their first response was, well, have you read our drug strategy yet? I'm like, no, we haven't read that. They're like, okay, go read that. Go talk with Cynthia Olson. She'll tell you what's going on. And so then from there, because we read it, because we responded back, they're like, okay, come to the Housing and Homelessness Coalition. There's 35 organizations who deal with homelessness, and join them and get involved in the dialogue. So then we go there. We open up transitional housing at the Abbey. It's had to be put away for now because we're going through a residential permit status. We put the cart before the horse a little bit. So they're kind of coming back, and they're like, and we're like, yeah, but people are dying in the cold on the streets. And they're like, yeah, but do this. So it's like, okay.
Yeah, that's working with the city.
Yep. We opened up a Thrive House for young women who are either pregnant or young moms who are like giving birth to children and needing a place that's not just like a recovery home, but like something sustainable. We ran that for a few years. That's in hibernation right now while we wait for another director to come in for that. And our major project right now is the city hasn't had a youth shelter for over a decade. And so we're building a 15-bed youth refuge. And again, we pursued an owner of a building that had 10 apartment units above and 3 storefronts on the main level in the worst part of town, most challenged part of town. And after we walked in to make an offer, and he said, since now that you've shown me that you're serious about it all and you've gone through everything, I'm just going to give you the building for free. So that's pretty cool. And those 10 apartment units help keep the whole thing sustainable. So we have sustainability built in. So we have a high-end cafe in our Abbey proper. We have, I think, 17 events a week that happen every single week, in addition to all the other ones. Our space is always free, so nobody has to pay for anything. And so tons of different groups use it. Tons of other organizations use it for their own fundraisers and all kinds of things like that. And then after the refuge is set up, our community does want to do an abbey in the woods, which would be either on a river or on a lake. And it would be a sustainable community, you know, green, farming, gardening, raising livestock, off the grid, retreat center, but also we'd also like to relaunch Thrive there so women can sort of unplug and distance themselves from all of the craziness of the urban setting, and find some long-term healing. We'd also like to work with some First Nations groups and allow them to sort of have a larger space on the land to grow their medicines and to learn and to begin like training their people in like building canoes and different like cultural pieces that are important to them. So anyway, so that's like a little down the road, but I kind of think you always need a very clear focus on like what the next few years are going to look like, and make it challenging enough so that you're always dependent on God to make it happen. Because if it's always manageable, sometimes it's challenging to know if God's behind it. You throw something large out there and you're like, okay, God, you have to be behind this. Are you? Because if you're not, then it just won't happen, and then it's no big deal. But if it's always manageable, you know, I had a friend who was fairly wealthy in Surrey. And I was having a conversation with him because I used to meet with all these different guys. And he said, you know what, Scott, I've never had to ask God for anything, literally. My marriage is fine. I've got lots of money. My kids are healthy. And everything has just fallen into place. And I don't know if I'm even in God's will or what I'm supposed to be doing because I've never talked to him about it and I've never had to. And so then I've used that example for other people to say, you know, poverty can be a blessing. Living on the edge can be a blessing, because when things open up or you feel led in a certain way and it works out, you know that God's behind it. And then that can provide you with a confidence and an assurance that you're in the right place doing the right thing.
I love how you've taken this, you know, the previous missional moment usually gets beat up by the next missional moment, because, you know, and sort of this, we're responding against it. But, right. You know, when I came to Sacramento in the late 90s, with, you know, we're still sort of at the tail end of the seeker thing, and the denomination was pushing that. And so I grew up in the urban ministry days of the 60s and 70s. That was my father's main venue. So I had all that DNA in me. But then I, you know, got back to North America doing ministry, read a bunch of those standard church growth seeker books, and the BHAGs, the big, hairy, audacious goals. And I love how you have incorporated that idea into your DNA. And I think, you know, I love the vision. I love the vision of the tree with the other trees. And you're exactly right. You know, God is the author and we are the books. And so if he's going to do something, he's going to do it. And if he's going to use you, he's going to use you. And, you know, you get some say about it, but not always a lot. So I think, you know, you're, you know, so in the late 90s, the seeker thing was all, you know, the seeker thing was tailing off. It's still hot in certain areas of the country, or the two countries. You know, now the doing with the community, not for the community. I mean, all those things are pretty hot right now. And just because something's hot doesn't mean it's bad. I mean, that's true too. But I love, you know, I've seen many attempts at what you're doing. It's just like church planting, you know, whatever, you know, 8 out of 10 church plants fail. Probably 98% of them grow to something less than 100 and plateau for 10 years and then die. And then you've got the few, we used to call them, when we were doing a lot of church planting in Sacramento, we used to call them lottery winners that would have the experience of Village Church in Surrey, because they're that rare.
It's the right place at the right time.
Right.
In circumstances that the planter has no control over.
That's right.
And it's perfect storm.
Right.
Moral failure here, something happening over here, some guy gets backstabbed over here, everyone's disillusioned, and there's thousands of them, and it's like, and you had that month window, and if you missed that month window, it would have been somebody else entirely.
That's right.
You had it.
That's right.
And now look at you. Oh wow, you're dynamic. You're a thought leader. It's like,
and it's the right person. I mean, it's the Mark Driscoll, or it's the Bill Hybels, or, I mean, not to take away from any of them too. It's exactly the right person, because that's a rare breed that can actually do that. And then lots of other things come.
My wife and I were watching The Crown. That Netflix series. Love the thing with Reverend Woods and that whole thing. I was a little emotional.
Where are you at? I've seen 1 through 3 of season 3. So if you're further ahead, don't tell me anything. All right.
But the Queen is taught. Once you get to the place called Moondust, that's my favorite episode of the whole series. But the Queen is talking to that uncle who abdicated. And the uncle says to her, essentially, you're the right woman for the job. You're the right person for the job, because the crown always ends up landing on the right head.
Yeah.
And so I think that, like, in essence, sort of what you're talking about, these different large church kind of leaders, it's like that crown of sorts kind of lands on the right head.
Yeah. But at the same time, when I hear what you're doing, it reminds me of Northside Chapel, my father's church in Patterson. They started, heroin was just sort of raging through in the 70s, raging through Patterson. And so they start these little, halfway houses for heroin addicts. And of course, AIDS would come at the end of it. But you didn't know that, during the heroin and urban ministry has been like this forever. But maybe not forever, but for a long time. And so I love what God is doing there. And the thing that occurred to me as you were talking was we do in a media saturated culture pay attention to the, I got someone debating, they're going to knock on my door in a second. It might be Daniel. He always has a certain knock. We'll see what happens. But in a media saturated culture, we look for the charismatic leader, but it's almost always the sacrificial leader. And here's the thing. And for every sacrificial leader that might be remembered in 50 years, thousands of them are forgotten by the standards of this world. I saw that in my father, and I saw that in my father's church. And my YouTube channel is just like, I made a video in exactly the right time, and had a little following because of it. I mean, that's the whole thing. I listen to Bishop Barron, I think, oh gosh, why can't I talk like him? But it's just God doing what God does. He uses who he wants, and not to get sidelined, but again, just loving the Kanye thing, right? Like that can't not be talked about. And I sent a little link. I don't know if you looked at it. It's a little obscure. I guess Dr. Dre is remixing Jesus is King. Oh, really?
And Kanye's dropping a Christmas album on Christmas Day. Jesus is Born. And then I don't know if it was Kanye who tweeted out, it takes making a gospel album to get Dr. Dre to remix your material, or something like that. But I was just like, oh, this is cool. And now I'm looking forward to Christmas Day to kind of like just get that and just and just see it. I've got lots to think about all of that. But I love all of it. I love all of it. I see I don't know, I have this heart where it's like, I look at all kinds of different media or storylines, and anytime it begins to touch on the true, I just get like, your heart just responds, right?
Yeah.
And even in like Kanye's songs, like there's enough in that, enough of the true in there where I you know, I just love like God is King, we're just soldiers. Even that, just like, I'm just like, good. That's good.
Yeah. So we have about 20 minutes left.
Yep.
Let's talk a little bit about this crazy conference that you folks had
Yes.
organized, because it's just, I had actually been thinking about, I was going to have Peugeot and Vervaeke, and I was working on a venue in Toronto. And because I have some connections, and I always just work in my church connections, but I didn't get, the person I approached didn't really bite. So it's like, okay, I'm not going to push. Just, I fed him the idea and he didn't bite. But then we get this invitation from you. So
yeah,
what the heck is going on?
okay. So here's a couple of things. I guess it's like a confluence of things. So then maybe you know that it's good or something. So part of Abbey's were part of what they accomplished or what they were engaged in was philosophy, culture making, art, all of these pieces. They were like the city center also, like the church used to be. And I'm not bemoaning the departure from that necessarily, but I want to have included in the Abbey's life, I always talk to my team about the judgment level that we look at as far as when we look at our organization or the Abbey. If Jesus and a kindly monk or nun, the two of them walked through the doors, and the question was, if you had this building, what would the two of you do with it? As long as the pieces that we're trying to accomplish would be somewhere close to that, then that's kind of like our navigation piece. Kind of like James K. Smith talks about that quote in his new book about the rowboat, and you're looking at the past to guide where you're going. And I think that's what we're trying to do very strongly. So it's like, okay, we take care of homeless people or people on the fringes. Good. We're offering meals every single day, lunch and dinner. Okay, that's good. We've offered transitional housing. We're doing a youth refuge. We're hosting everybody else's events and their cultural pieces. Where's our content? Where's our contribution to the community? Not just let's host some things, but let's actually accomplish some what we think are essential pieces that a Christian community should be offering to the community. That looks like an informed, fair, lively, generative dialogue between people on differing views and viewpoints. And I loved how you had talked about a couple of weeks or a couple of months ago, this creation of a language. This ability to break down the isolating, demarkers of this is a person, this is that, this is, And I think that in our increasingly polarized world, where it's like left and right, and everybody's like siloed, they're not talking to each other anymore. We need to create avenues where, and this is where I was talking to Dr. Richard Mondrell from the university, because he had sat down with me. He's like, tell me why I want to come. Tell me what this is even about. And so
hang on a second. I'm a
no
local church pastor. Keep talking.
Yeah. Okay. So just making sure or reinforcing the fact that we need to have these conversations and dialogues where people from completely different viewpoints, or what you would think would be different viewpoints, can find some common ground and some understanding. When I started talking to him about this, he was like, well, why don't we get a Jordan Peterson? He actually threw that out without me even. And I said, well, right now there's a little bit too much heat on that. I said, this is a first impression. People make up their minds in 15 seconds. We have to have a fair, balanced, loving conversation where every person who comes would feel enriched and felt that their viewpoint was presented well and not attacked. We have to get a couple of those under our belt before we can start bringing in some more polarizing people, which I'm not at all opposed to, but the community, the Thunder Bay community, has to be like, oh, well, I was at that last one, and one of our local professors was there, and he had his say, and he was heard and understood, and they can have some frame of reference. And actually, what was interesting was he had talked to me about his lamenting. There was a locally famous agnostic woman who was leading this atheists and agnostics group. She had passed away 2 years ago. And he's like, we're kind of this directionless, we barely meet anymore kind of group. And I said, well, if we pulled off a conference like this every 6 months, this could be a unifying thing for this group that you have, that you care about, that you love, where you can start suggesting your own speakers, start getting reading lists that you're going over before the speaker even comes. The world is your oyster for this group of yours. And as I began to talk about that, I could see that all of a sudden he started coming alive to that idea, and he started getting excited about that. And so Thunder Bay doesn't really have anything like this going on that I'm aware of at this level. And in conjunction to that, so that's kind of floating around. Then what's also floating around is my sister and brother-in-law. They introduced me to Pajot like a year ago. So I'm paying attention. They're like, hey, let's commission him to do some work of art for the Abbey. He'd love the Abbey. I'm like, well, that's interesting. Let's have him come in and run workshops, because I was friends with Father Nick, who is one of the local Greek Orthodox priests. And so it's like, okay, Pajot's Orthodox. I've got some work, and they were coming to help make food, and they were up in our prayer tower at times and different things like that. And what's nice about the Abbey is we exist pre-schism, before East, West, whatever. St. Patrick is an Orthodox saint. He's a Catholic saint. He's safe. And as we try to be ecumenical and like keeping the main thing, it's great to sort of have a pre-troubles model.
Yes. Yes.
And so anyway, so with all of that, we were like, okay, well, wait a minute. If we're going to have Pajot come here, who else is in that orbit? Who else can contribute to a conversation? And let's not just have one person. Let's make it a well-rounded conference. Because I remember my grandfather started up the Baptist Summer Conference, where they'd bring in Baptist speakers and they'd do lunch afterwards and have picnics, and it would be like for like 2 full days, and you'd get notable people who would like energize and and now that's like, who does that anymore? So rare. And then I'm also talking to one of our, like, we don't have membership in our congregation, but one of the people who attends, and he's like, hey, what if we got like the symphony orchestra in for an hour between sessions, and let's make this thing just exceptional and innovative and so I do have some small remaining tendrils of that excellence piece from the larger church, right? Where it's like these things actually kind of matter.
Yes, they do.
Even like name tags, like when we do village stuff, it wasn't like the clear plastic, whatever. It was like the thin, dark gray slate with like the white, and it was like
nice name tags.
next level, nice name tags.
Yep.
Swag bags and all these kinds of things. So we're like, okay, let's actually pull off something meaningful, innovative, excellent. Let's get conversations happening, because lots of people also wonder what the Abbey is.
Yeah.
Or what we stand for.
Yeah.
We don't have a lot of branded events that we do that say, here's some people who we're very comfortable with, who we enjoy and benefit from. And here's some streams of thought that we'd like to introduce you to, or a new way to have conversations, or these kinds of things, and have it be like in an Abbey way, which is arms open wide to everybody, welcomed to the table, you belong here, and let's have a balanced dialogue, discussion. Let's talk about meaning. Let's talk about consciousness, looking at Dr. Richard Mondrell's stuff about when you determine neurological death and when you think consciousness is gone, and it's like, okay, we've got some interesting things to talk about. And then also, as Catherine's like, our speakers are loving the fact that they're all able to like come together and like hang out.
Yeah.
I'm like, you know what, this sounds really cool. So as soon as like the first little, let's see if this might work, let's just put out some requests and see who would be willing to come. As soon as the confirmation started coming in and some energy building, we're like, oh, all right, let's do it. Let's make it happen. So yeah, like that's the broad strokes for that.
I think it's going to be great. We don't know. We obviously don't know Richard, but you know, Jonathan and John and I have been talking and watching each other's stuff and thinking about each other's stuff, and so for us, for the three of us, this is very exciting to get to be together in person. But I'm, you know, especially after this conversation, I am so excited to see the Abbey and see this work. And I'm going to share this video with some people who don't watch my videos normally because they're pastors and they know me real well. And they're like, why would I sit and listen to you for 2 hours?
Right.
I say, no, this one you want to watch. It's not just me talking. You want to hear about this, because this is something, this is something I think people will want to come to. Maybe they'll come to the event, but I think they're also going to want to come and see what God is doing through your Abbey, and have an understand and sort of get their mind around it. You know, part of the amazing thing about the church is how it grows organically. And you see this in church history. I mean, you and I, in terms of both of us grew up with parents who were deeply committed to the church, deeply committed to the gospel, and also weren't too fussy about denominational boundaries. That's very evangelical, of course, but it's also ecumenical, and that's a good thing too. So, well, we just have a few minutes left. Anything you want to ask me? I've been a very poor host and dominating, forcing you to just keep talking this whole time. And so, and any questions for me that you have?
Yeah. The one question that had popped into my head was, as you're sort of interacting with all of the content that you're bringing, what are you bringing your people through recently? Like, what's on your heart for the people in your church? Like, what are you kind of like leading them into, kind of thing?
The real heart, the difficult question for me is always, which is my church? So there's the Living Stones congregation, which is a aging Christian Reformed church in Sacramento, which has never sort of been I mean, there's a Christian Reformed church in Thunder Bay, so you have some idea of what the CRC is like. I can tell you
a super funny story. As soon as you finish, I'm going to let you finish, but you got to let me get this funny story.
So that's my congregation. And then there's the meetup group, which meets here at Living Stones, which is sort of another congregation. And then there's this Discord server that started, which has sort of become another congregation. And then there's people who watch my channel. I'm working with a friend from Southern California, John Van Donk, and I knew him before this. He used to be a Christian Reformed minister. That's a whole nother story that you can find on my channel with my first talk with him. But, when he saw people watching my channel and he said, "Oh, you got to do a meetup." It's like, okay, we'll do a meetup. No one will come. No one will come. But then people came, and it's like, oh, now people are coming. What do I do with that? And so, he and I are working on something that will be for his church in Southern California. We're still working on what is it called? And our last conversation was, Conversations on the Edge, where so he started a meetup, which is kind of a small thing, but we also recognize that a big difficulty for people are finding spaces where they can have free flow conversations that are both safe in a certain way and risky in another way. It has to be both. Yeah. And how can we create spaces and actually invite people into them, and will they come? And we're seeing that happening. And I see this as an essential part of what churches need to do. And having listened to you now, this is very Abbey-ish for us, because this is, people come to my meetup, and now it's still a Jordan Peterson meetup, and that's, that's how we started. In some ways it's problematic, but it just is what it is. But then people come and they will say things at a meetup which are just about anything. But that's been, so of course, my father's ministry and my grandfather's ministry and my ministry here at Living Stones, it's always had sort of that, you have no idea what's going to walk through the door on any given week, and it's going to be okay. We're going to at least try to make room for this people. And you can never make room for everyone. That never works out that way. But so what I'm seeing is an increasing conviction that the church has to come to terms with a lot of things, one of which is, so there's the practical things that I'm doing that in the meetup in terms of, so you don't believe in God. Okay, so you've got all these other ideas, some of which are problematic in one way or another. Okay, we're going to have a conversation. We're going to sit and talk, and it's going to be okay. And the church in many ways right now is one of the few places that this can happen. The city can't do it. The university can't do it. The church can do it. And how can churches do this? That then is the question. And that's where a lot of these philosophical, theological issues get enjoined in terms of a lot of the Vervaeke stuff. I learned a ton from Jordan Peterson with a bunch of his things. I've learned a ton from Jonathan Peugeot. So my monologue videos are basically just me. I'm trying to think through all this stuff in a way that people may be able to follow. And but the Abbey's concerns and the Abbey's witness and practice, are very much in alignment with, with why I've always longed for a church where people could come and talk about their stuff. And okay, they don't believe in God, or maybe they believe in 10 gods or 500,000 gods, or whatever, but they're people.
It's interesting. We have this couple who come on Saturday mornings who are atheists to the core. She's one of the professors at Lakehead, and she said, "You know what? In my early childhood, I had some church in me. And for me and my partner, this is our church experience, to come here, to sit because we've got a bit of a bar at the counter. So she sits there with her partner and a guy called Tony, and either Andrew is there Saturday morning and he'll talk for an hour and a half with them, or I'll be there and then I'll slide in. And it's like they're very, and they've even said, we don't believe everything that you believe, And we actually think some of what you believe is problematic, but that's okay. This is church for us. This is where we find community on the weekend, and and it's this conversation of meaning that happens. So it's fascinating.
Yeah.
And I love it. Okay, funny story about a Christian Reformed church. I think there's 3 in Thunder Bay.
Okay.
Some of our greatest volunteers at the Abbey come from Christian Reformed churches. And so I get this invitation to preach. And I don't know what kind of Christian Reformed church you happen to have, because I know there's some variations, obviously.
Yeah.
I'm not aware of how liturgical this one church is. And they invite me to preach. And I'm like, okay. So she sends me, the woman who's doing the follow-up, the secretary, she sends me an attachment. She's like, here's the order of worship. I'm like, oh, okay, whatever. I don't pay attention to it. I'm like, I'm there to do the sermon. So
No.
Yes, sir. You see where this is going. So
yes, I do.
So then she's like, okay, so then I get to the church, just my Bible and sermon notes. And she's like, okay, so they're like, the first thing you do is you go up to this upper room and you pray with all the elders of the church. Like, okay. And then they're going to come down, and then so-and-so is going to walk you to the front. I'm like, okay, so how, like, after how many songs? She's like, no. What's going to happen is you're going to go up, you're going to pray, and then he's going to walk you to the front. And I'm like, okay, but like, what about the song stuff? She's like, oh, well, there will be piano playing. I'm like, okay. She's kind of being vague. So I go up, we pray, I go down, and then I'm standing there, and she's like, you need the official handshake from the elder to like transfer the stuff. I'm like, okay. So then the authority or whatever. So then as soon as the music starts playing, the guy looks at me, he's like, come on. I'm like, oh, okay. So then I walk up to the front, and then I'm just kind of like standing there, and then he like goes to shake my hand. I'm like, okay. And he goes and sits down, and the church is all just sitting there staring at me. And the piano player is looking up expectantly at me. And as soon as that happens, instant back sweat just like materializes on my back. And I'm just like, what is going on? And then all of a sudden the woman is like, I can see her like panicking. And so I'm just standing there, and I'm like, am I expected? And I just say it. I'm like, am I expected to lead this whole thing? And they're all like, and then the lady's like, didn't you get that liturgy? There's like 80 people. She's like, didn't you get that liturgy? I'm like, yeah, but I didn't print it off. So then she quickly like opens up her iPad, and she like finds it, and she like runs it up, and she like gives it to me for me to like, and I've got like the hymn books and stuff, and I'm like, and then I'm like leading the hymns. I was like, what?
Yeah.
And so then, and I was like, this is the worst. And so then afterwards, I'm like, I am so sorry. And it was just all the older people, they thought it was like the funniest thing. They're just like, no, that's funny. That's super funny. So I felt a little relieved, but it was like the most stressful preaching experience I've ever had. When you walk up and you're like, oh, man. So my whole team, when I told them about it, they're all just laughing, just like you are. They thought it was so funny.
Yeah. Well, that's that's the traditional Christian Reformed process where the minister runs the whole service. It's not, you've got a worship leader and 3 fast, 3 slow, 1 to get ready and 1 to go. None of that. It's here's the liturgy and on through it. So, well, I'm not surprised that you have. My father's church was started by, there's a clump of about a dozen Christian Reformed churches, and of that, there were people who had a heart for the inner city at that point. African Americans moved up from the South. Immigrants weren't coming anymore because of the world wars in the middle of the 20th century, and so many. It's deep in the CRC DNA that service and giving, and so I'm glad that at least some in those churches have seen your witness and embraced its mission and decided to participate. That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, I have to run along, but Scotland, this has been tremendous. And
Great. I was so nervous about it. This is my first podcast thing of any sort that I've ever done.
You were great. And I have a problem in that I have not enough self-discipline. So when I have something that I really want to post right away for everyone to see it, so it'll come out soon.
Okay. Well, final thing that my sister would kill me for if I didn't say
Oh,
it.
yes.
The conference, we've got the urbanabbey.ca website that you can go on to. You can also look us up on Facebook. So, and I'm supposed to be creating a conscience and consciousness Facebook page. So I'm going to be actually working on that as soon as we hang up.
Okay. So when you get it done, send it to me, and
Yes.
I'll put the link in the show notes.
Perfect.
And people will find it. And it's a little ways away, so there'll be time, but folks will want to fly into this. I know it. It's gonna be a big deal in a rather small community.
Yeah,
so,
I'm so looking forward to it.
Oh, it's gonna be great fun. So thank you so much, and you and I will talk again.
All right. Bye.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.